Hey everyone, thanks for joining the webinar today. We're going to get started here. So today's webinar is all about SOLIDWORKS Visualize. So to get started with SOLIDWORKS Visualize, I wanted to first kind of introduce what the product is and give you an idea of what SOLIDWORKS Visualize is capable of. So I'll play a short video. But as you're taking a look at this, kind of pay attention to some of the special effects. Notice that we have some static images, we have some rendered video content. So there's a variety of different types of output that we can produce. A lot of these are pretty visually compelling images, very photorealistic with lighting, different sun studies, and different reflections and animations throughout these different images. And so really to kind of summarize what SOLIDWORKS Visualize is, I would sum that up and say it's basically a virtual photo studio. So it's going to allow you to create amazing digital content from your 3D CAD data without having to produce products and take photographs, but yet be able to still produce stunning photoreal content. For the presentation today, I wanted to take it from a beginner's perspective. I wanted to start with a very simple day in the life of maybe a CAD engineer or maybe a marketing person that's responsible for digital content, and kind of walk you guys through. I imagine most of you are SOLIDWORKS users, so kind of taking it from that perspective, going from your SOLIDWORKS CAD data to Visualize, but of course, you could use other CAD platforms and work with Visualize as well. So again, the idea here is to give you a process of going directly from your CAD data to something that's truly photorealistic and high quality output that you could put on your website and your marketing brochures and trade show graphics and things like that, or just looks really great in a presentation that you're doing to a customer. Okay, so the workflow that we'll walk through follows a couple of steps here. So getting your data into Visualize, which again is a standalone application. I'll touch more on that in a few moments, but there's some great benefits to that. So importing your data, then getting your visual appearances exactly the way you want them, and then adjusting the scene, which is basically the lighting and the environment that you're in, any background images, things like that. Getting your camera positioned exactly where you need it. So think of an actual camera that you're positioning, you're setting the focal points and things like that. And then finally the output content. So again, this may be a static rendering, it may be some type of image. For this presentation, we're really focusing on just the basics, just doing a static rendering. We'll probably do some follow-up webinars to focus on some of the more advanced capabilities within the software. So again, we'll take just a few minutes on each one of these segments, and then at the end, I'll take a look and see what questions you guys have posted in the questions pane. So the first step is to import your data into the software. Again, it's a standalone application. This really gives you guys some great capabilities to be able to install on someone else's machine if you have a person maybe from a marketing team or from another division, maybe that isn't a SOLIDWORKS user but is responsible for creating this content. Really gives you a great tool to be able to do that. So what we'll see in this segment is there's a variety of ways to get the data in, whether you're going from SOLIDWORKS to Visualize or just directly opening Visualize and pulling the data in. All right, so to get started, I'm going to show you the workflow going from SOLIDWORKS. So in your regular environment here in SOLIDWORKS, we've got the Homatro spreader that we're going to be working with today, complete with some visual appearances applied. We've got some decals, things like that to make it visually appealing. Looks great in SOLIDWORKS. We're ready to start creating some nice content. So we have on the Visualize tab on the Command Manager, we have a couple of options here. For a simple export and an advanced, I'll cover the simple in just a moment. We'll start right with the advanced. So this is going to give us the most capabilities within Visualize to be able to link our model back over to our SOLIDWORKS CAD data. So if we're still making some design changes, maybe some last minute stuff, while we're making those changes, we can still start creating our marketing content and then maintain a link back and forth and go ahead and update our visualized content. So it gives you some really great capabilities. So you see pretty quickly it's already brought my information right into SOLIDWORKS Visualize. And I'm going to take a step back here and just activate what's called simple mode. And within this simple mode, if you're new to the software, it's kind of a nice step-by-step guide that you can walk through just hitting on these different buttons, which, as you'll see, correspond with the layout of our presentation for today. So maybe you just want to change some visual aspects of one of the appearances that you see here. So maybe I just want to make that blue. Again, we'll get back into appearances in just a few moments here. So now I've got some changes made. I've got my model imported into SOLIDWORKS Visualize. And now I'm going to go back over to my CAD data, and I need to make some design changes. In this case, I'm just switching to another configuration where I've got some parts in a different position so you can visually see this. But again, just imagine maybe some CAD design changes are happening here. And then I go ahead and save my model, and I hop back over to Visualize, and I'm going to be presented with this message while I'm working in Visualize that, hey, the SOLIDWORKS CAD data has changed and we're linked over to that. Do you want to go ahead and update? Yes or no? So I'm going to go ahead and update, and you'll see pretty quickly it'll re-import the data. And the benefit of making that change that I showed you guys with the blue visual appearance there, so the benefit is not only do we get the data re-imported, but any changes that we've already made to the model, any of the painting that we've already done is still going to be honored. So we get the CAD updates as well as we get to maintain some changes, so it's not going back to square one. Okay, so that's one method to get your CAD data in that, again, gives you that link back and forth using the advanced settings. Or another way is to use either in SOLIDWORKS, use the Export Simple option right here, or if you're in Visualize, you can open up existing projects, you can go to some of the samples, you can go to your recent SOLIDWORKS documents here, and you can open things up from there. Or if I just want to start a brand new project, you can create a template that's going to be your starting point that has the scene and things that you like there. So on the very first tab here, under Models, if I've got a brand new project and I want to start bringing some data in, I can just go ahead and import information right here. Okay, so I'll select my SOLIDWORKS assembly. And the really important one is this first set of options right here. So automatic is the advanced setting from SOLIDWORKS that's going to give you a link back over to your CAD data. The appearance setting is what's going to group things together to give you really quick, easy visual painting. So anything that is exactly identical within SOLIDWORKS, the same visual appearance, will be grouped together and visualized. So as you start doing your painting, all of those visual appearances will update, which is very different than if you do automatic. Each component's got its own structure, exactly like the structure within SOLIDWORKS. Okay, so for simplicity, if you're new to the software and just getting started and you want ease of use, just go for appearance. Have it bring in the appearances from SOLIDWORKS, which is really awesome. You can spend a little time getting things set up in SOLIDWORKS, make it look kind of the way that you want it, and then go into Visualize, and you've already got things set up nicely. It'll import those visual appearances one-to-one. And you can bring in cameras from SOLIDWORKS. You can bring in the scene if you like, or you can just eliminate those. Notice you can bring in decals as well. Okay, so in just a couple of seconds there, brings in the data, and I've got it imported from my SOLIDWORKS CAD assembly. And again, this is going to be grouped together. So if I decide that I want to change some visual appearances, when I go to drop that on here, notice it's going to apply to anything that is matching that particular color. Okay, so any changes that I want to make to that, I can just simply drag and drop, and I get immediate updates of anything that matches that color. And so just to kind of summarize what we saw in that particular segment, Some of the key highlights were the fact that we can push data from SOLIDWORKS directly into Visualize, or we can import directly in Visualize. We have several different options to be able to group things together or maintain the structure from the SOLIDWORKS assembly. And then we can choose to monitor the file if we wanted to be able to update when we make changes to our CAD designs. So in the next segment, I want to focus a little bit more on the painting aspect. So once I've got the CAD data in there, I want to set my visual appearances. Now, just because the stuff comes in nicely from SOLIDWORKS doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be exactly what I want to use. There's a rich library of materials that I can use directly in Visualize, and some of those are going to be a little bit more high quality and offer some better textures and options. So let's take a look at what that process looks like. All right, so with my model imported, the next tab over, so we've got our models, then the next tab over is our visual appearances. And so we can see a listing of all the different appearances that are applied to the model. You can select an appearance and you can make color changes right here pretty easily. If you want to put in specific colors, so maybe you've got a specific RGB value that you want to enter in there, you can just type those in numerically here and get the exact TPM blue color. If it's something you're going to use over and over again in the project, you may just want to add it to your favorites here. And notice there's also an eyedropper, so I can drag and drop onto maybe a label in the model, or maybe I've got a website up that's got a picture and I want to be able to grab a specific color from something outside of the Visualize application. I can do that as well. Okay, so we'll take a look at a couple of additional things that we can do with our appearances. So there's a nice variety of built-in appearances within the software. Notice we also have our SOLIDWORKS appearances exactly the way that you see them in SOLIDWORKS, so we can utilize those as well. We've got a variety of things preset for things like the automotive industry, metals, paints, and any of those, again, just a simple drag and drop allows you to just go ahead and apply those. You can hit Control Z to undo, just like other applications. So if we go to a more traditional anodize here, and maybe we'll just assume that this is going to be a cast aluminum part and we want to have a nice anodize on there. So I can select any of these materials and easily customize them just by clicking on the color, adjusting the roughness, things like that. Each of the different material types are going to have some different properties such as texture and the way that the light reflects off of it, and different ways to customize those appearances. And again, just going back to that color that I just created. So now I've got a really nice anodized look. Maybe I want to go to some type of painted look, so I've got a candy apple red paint. And maybe I want that to also match my color scheme. So now I've got a few options here. I can see what it looks like when it's anodized, painted, or a really thick textured paint. Okay, so once I've created those visual appearances here, I can give them a name if I like. So maybe TPM blue anodize. And then I can even add them directly over to my library by saving the appearance and choosing where I want to put my custom visual appearances. And then where those show up is going to be right here. So anything that I use frequently, I can just build up my own custom library of various materials here and then just drag and drop those right in. Okay, so a quick summary of what we just saw in the paint section is the fact that the software automatically grabs stuff from SOLIDWORKS really can save a lot of time, get you to your final rendering very quickly. And then if you want to utilize some of the custom materials that are built into the software, there's also a local and a web library. I forgot to show the web portion of it. I'll show that in just a second. And you can, of course, create your own custom materials, including textures and all those fun things to create some really high quality, truly realistic materials, because really when you're doing renderings, the materials are incredibly important to get true photorealism. You've got to have perfect textures and things like that to really create nice high quality renderings. So I'll touch on the web library in just a moment. Next, we're going to take a look at scenes. The paint, scenes, cameras, all those have both a local installed library as well as a web library. So the scenes are going to be basically all the lighting and the background images to create a nice environment for your rendering. Okay, so the scenes are the next tab over. Actually, let me hop back over here real quick. So under appearances, there's a local library and there's also a cloud library. So when you click on the cloud library, for example, if I go into automotive here, notice the ones with the green checkboxes are the ones that I have downloaded and installed locally. If I want to add any additional ones, I can just click on it, it'll download, and then it'll be available for me to go ahead and utilize. Just drag and drop that right in. It's now in my local library. So the nice thing about that is you don't have to go out and hunt for high quality materials and manually create your own. There's a nice library, cloud library built in. You can go ahead and just add anything you need to utilize. Okay, so taking a look at the scenes. So we've got my template is starting out with just a basic Chrome Studio. Looks pretty good, but maybe I want to go ahead and change that. So under the libraries, we can go to our environments, and again, there's a local and a cloud library. Okay, so some of these get installed by default. There's a variety of other ones that I can go ahead and download if I want to add any of those different environments. Okay, so to add them to the model, you can just drag and drop them in. It takes just a few seconds and it will update here, and you can see the lighting gets updated. Some of these have nice high quality 360 degree HDR images. So for example, this guy right here has got a really nice 360 degree image that we can work with. And again, not only do we get that nice background image that goes along with it, but we also get the perfect lighting setup that's going to match and make it look like the product is really in that particular environment. So that's what's really nice about these environments instead of just using a static background image. Okay, another example would be the warehouse here. A couple of good examples. I'll just kind of rotate around. The warehouse really has some nice lighting inside of there and a pretty simple plain background with something to look at. Okay, so where those scenes play out is when I drag and drop them in, they get added to the project, or if I double click them, it'll just switch over whichever one's active to whichever one I'm changing to. And if they're added to the project, then you can just very quickly double click to get back and forth. When you have a scene maybe that is going to require some rotation, maybe I want to get to a certain angle here and I need to be looking at the back side of the model, but I really want the environment over here. Okay, so I rotate the model to get the exact angle that I'm looking for, and then I can rotate the scene Okay, so I can make adjustments here to rotate the scene to get the scene rotated exactly where I need it so I can see the background. It also obviously adjusts my lighting for me, 360 degree rotation, getting the lighting just right so it hits the model where I need it. And then adjusting the brightness right here, you can use these little sliders and increase, decrease brightness. That's going to adjust the brightness of the scene and how the light's hitting the model and everything together so it looks fluid as a nice finished output. Okay, if you're going to use something that's a little bit more traditional like this, the rotation can be useful again for any lights that are hitting the model. Just move those around and make sure that the light hits your model exactly where you need it. Maybe the gradient and color of the background looks just right, or maybe you don't want to see the background at all. So you can go to just a static color and you can choose which color you want the background to be right here. Typically, I like to keep the environments in there. They usually look really good. And then lastly, if you do want to maybe create some type of background image manually, you can insert backplates. So that could be just maybe any photograph that you have. You can go out to the web and just download any type of photo and just bring in a backplate. And the backplates can be turned on and off with the different scenes here. Notice the backplates get listed down here. Again, those are going to be your background images, and you can turn them on and off right here. And again, switch back and forth between your different setups. So in that segment, we got a chance to see some of the great environments that are integrated in with the software. Of course, you can also create your own background images and insert those as needed. You can create your own 360 environments as well. And just a few little settings, maybe adjusting the rotation, adjust the brightness a little bit, and pretty quickly and easily you can get just the perfect look that you're going for. Okay, so once we have the model set up, once we have the environment set up, then the next step is to get the camera angle or camera angles that you're going for, get those set up. So that's going to include things like the angle, the amount of perspective, maybe you want to set the focus on a certain area and blur other things away. So we'll take a look at doing that. Okay, so you can start from an existing camera angle that you already have. You can create brand new camera angles. You can double click to switch back and forth and activate various angles. You can also lock their position. So if you don't want to accidentally mess something up, you can go ahead and just lock that in place. You can also use, for those SOLIDWORKS users out there, you can utilize something that looks pretty familiar here, the visual cubes here, to be able to hit on different standard view orientations of the model. Okay, so maybe I want to get a nice side view here of the model and maybe adjust the angle just a little bit. I can use the arrow keys on the keyboard to do those adjustments. I can use the Z key to zoom out, Shift Z to zoom in, or I can just use familiar SOLIDWORKS mouse commands. Just click and hold the center mouse wheel to rotate around. I can scroll the center mouse wheel in and out to zoom in and out. So nice familiar transition going from SOLIDWORKS over to SOLIDWORKS Visualize, leveraging the same commands. If you want to get really specific, you can come over to the Transform tab and you can adjust the longitude and latitude right here, just dragging these little sliders around, or you can drag the course adjustment right here. Okay, so maybe for this example, I want to get a nice tight close-up here looking with the company logo, and I want this thing kind of coming in from the side, so I'm going to zoom in nice and tight, and maybe I want to crank up the perspective here, get a nice dramatic effect, and then to get even more of an effect, I can turn on depth of field, and I can pick a specific location that I want to focus on. And then I can adjust the f-stop here. If I want to have more of it in focus, I can drag it to the right. If I want to have less of an area that's going to be in focus, I can drag that over to the left. So it's really kind of focusing in just on that logo region. And then at any time, if you want to adjust, where you're focusing, just hit the pick and go ahead and click. And now you've got adjustment to a different area. Maybe you want to focus on the tip right here. If you want to give your cameras a name, maybe call this close-up, something like that. And of course, we can just double-click to switch back and forth between the different camera angles and have those stored. Captures all the different settings, including some filters as well. So we can enable post-processing. So when I turn that on and off, you can see quite a drastic difference. So we can turn up the brightness and exposure and adjust a variety of different settings here to really get a dramatic effect. And then maybe tweak things just a little bit here. Zoom in just a little, and that looks like a pretty good angle. So what we're looking at in the graphics area, there's a couple of different settings that we can work with here. There's a preview mode that's just very basic. Think of that kind of like in SOLIDWORKS turning off real view graphics so that you can just quickly get your camera angles set up, especially if you're working with a really detailed model, maybe that's crippling your performance a little bit. You can go to that to get your camera angles all set up and your appearances set up. Fast is what we've been working with. It gives you a little bit more reflections, lighting, and shading, but not a full true output look. The third model, or the third option, is what's going to give you the true high quality lighting situations where you're going to get perfect reflections, you're going to get lights hitting off of things exactly where they should be. Go ahead and rotate this and get that light to reflect real nice right inside of here. And you'll notice that it takes a few seconds to start rezzing up. If you look down here in the bottom, you can see the number of passes. You can see how long it's taking to do each one of those passes, and it gives you a rough idea as to how long you should probably wait until you get some decent quality of what you're looking at. All right, so quick summary of some of the things that we just saw there. Familiar mouse commands from SOLIDWORKS. It's a great option to enable and visualize to ensure the easy transition from SOLIDWORKS to Visualize. Familiar mouse commands, arrow keys, Z, center mouse wheel, all that stuff that you're familiar with. Control and center mouse wheel to pan, all that fun stuff. Setting just a few settings within the camera, things like the aspect ratio of the camera itself and the perspective, longitude, latitude, things like that will get you the perfect angle that you're looking for. And then finally, if you want to add in some additional capability in the Visualize Professional, you can turn on depth of field. You can do things like image blur, where you're going to get glow of things that are reflecting light off of them or emitting light. You're going to get that blur around the edges of those regions. So a couple of tools that are available just in the professional version. So for our final segment, we've got things set up exactly the way we want them. Now we're ready to create our final output. So back over to Visualize. The final output is going to be done right here under the rendering option. So when I click on render, I'm going to be presented with a toolbar that allows me to take things like snapshots. That's just going to be a quick visual of what you're seeing in the graphics area there. You can do renderings, animations. You can do 360-degree turntables in the professional version. You can even do sun studies that are going to allow you to put in the time of day from one time to another and have that sun moving around, like the example you saw with the sea-dew in the video a little bit earlier, if you noticed that. So for this example, I'm just going to do some output renderings. You can save some presets, so if you have certain things that you've set up for particular maybe cover art, or if you're doing trade shows, things like that, you can store your settings for future use. You can give the file a name here, choose where you want to put it. It's going to go by default right into your documents and where you've installed the software to put all the content, all the appearances and the images and all of your scenes, all of the setup material, and then all the projects that you're saving as well. That's the default. You can put it somewhere else. You can choose a variety of output formats. So if you want to do something with no background so that you can put it into a PowerPoint presentation, for example, with no background, you would want to choose something like PNG or TIFF. If you're just trying to capture with the background and everything, then you want to go for something like JPEG, of course, or one of the others. And if you do choose something like PNG, you can include alpha right here, and that'll get rid of the background. Output mode is going to allow you to output just either a single camera if you choose render, or you can choose all cameras. You can also choose all configurations. We didn't really talk about those yet, but if you had maybe some different colors that you were interested in for the model, or some different scenes, some different positions, maybe you have where you want to show more than one iteration of your design all at once, you can leverage configurations to set those up, and then you can output render all the different configurations at once. And then for some more compelling experiences in the professional version, you can do things like panoramics and interactive content where users can open up a web page and interact. You can also do virtual reality to get real experiences of interiors and things like that. So once you choose your options up there, then you want to set, of course, your output resolution, set your aspect ratio, size, choose a quality level for your rendering. The denoiser is something new for Visualize 2018 Service Pack 3 that allows you to do your renderings in roughly half the time. So really nice enhancement that just got added recently. So if you guys are on an older Service Pack of SOLIDWORKS, go ahead and upgrade to 2018 Service Pack 3 to get that denoiser. And so you'll see what that's going to do in just a moment here. So I'll go ahead and just start a single rendering here. And while this is rendering, what you'll notice is this little icon right here is the denoiser. And so at first it's going to think that it's going to take a couple of minutes to create this rendering, but once it starts processing and leveraging that technology, it's actually going to zoom right through pretty quickly. So a couple of tips while this thing is processing. Notice it started out at about 3 minutes, now it's down to about a minute, and it'll probably finish in about 30 seconds or so. It's going to jump ahead pretty quickly. It also gives you some alerts down here in the bottom that lets you know how the offline renderer is doing. If you want to continue working, you can just close the rendering. You can close Visualize and it'll render even faster, and it'll just continue processing in the background if you tell it to go ahead and do that. And then once it's finished, so pretty quickly, like I said, probably about 30 seconds or so, we've got a nice output rendering here. Gives you a nice shortcut link right here that you can click on, and it'll take you right to Windows Explorer, exactly where that rendering just got output. So you can go ahead and open that up. If you do happen to have the professional version, though, instead of doing just a single rendering at a time, a much better option is to go ahead and get everything set up and then use the option to send it out to the queue. So you can get different angles set up, different cameras, different colors, maybe some different scenes. So you have a variety of different options. Get those all set up. Just activate each one of them. Go ahead and send that out to the queue. You can also do output mode all cameras and send those to the queue as well. So it'll grab all the different cameras and then maybe play with some different color options. So some really nice options, especially for things that are going to take a little bit longer to process, like when you go to the accurate mode and set it for maybe 3,000 passes as a default minimum for a nice high quality rendering, or maybe increase that a little bit. Another nice option is that you can do time limits, and you can say, and if you're doing multiple cameras, this works as a total time limit. So you can say, hey, I'm going to let this run overnight. I want it to be done in the morning. Give me 12 hours worth of rendering, and go home for the night, come in the morning, and you've got it all finished up. So a quick recap of what we just saw in that segment. We've got plenty of options for outputting content. In the standard version of the software, you can do single or all cameras, and professional, you get to build up a nice job queue and let the offline renderer manage that queue and render without user intervention, get the whole queue set up and let it run. And of course, you can save some presets if you have different settings that you always want to remember to use for particular types of output content. So to kind of summarize some of the things that we just saw today, what is SOLIDWORKS Visualize going to do for you? Well, it's going to allow you to create truly stunning content. It really is a high-end photo rendering package that really creates some beautiful output content. And again, we've just kind of scratched the surface here, focusing on a simple start of the software and using mainly the standard features. The software is capable of a whole lot more with animations and virtual reality and interactive content as well. So with that, I'm going to conclude the presentation. I'm going to take a look at the comments that you guys have here, or the questions section, see if you guys have any questions for me. A question wanting to take a look at adjusting the texture on a part like a brushed metal and changing the grain direction. Sure, let's take a look at that. So the texture that gets applied, the question that he's asking is how do you adjust kind of the angle and get that texture just right. So when you select on something that has a texture, you can adjust the bump map. So if you want more strength or less strength, you have a variety of options right in there. And then there's also the texture mapping. So if you're talking about increasing the intensity or what type of texture, you want to be over here on the bump map, and you can increase or decrease kind of the scale of that bump map, and then you can increase the intensity with the bump strength right here. If you're talking about kind of how it gets mapped onto a surface, you can select either the default here, which in this case is the box mapping, or depending on what type of geometry you're working with, you can choose others like a planar mapping. So if I had like a disc brake or something like that, and I wanted to show scratch marks flat on the disc brake, you could use a planar mapping for something like that. And then you have some options here for manipulating the texture. So with these little guys right here, you can grab the arrows to adjust the height of the texture vertically, linearly, and you can also rotate the texture with this little visual manipulation handle right here. So if I wanted to kind of offset that to an angle, something like that. Takes a few seconds to res up here, but you can see how that's going to adjust the angle here for me. So there's a variety of different options, and again, it just kind of depends on the type of geometry that you're working with. Choose the appropriate mode for the texture mapping. And then there's some additional shortcuts here, things like fitting to the part. You can transform visually with these, you can scale with these, or you can use the manipulator in the graphics area, just whichever seems to work best for you. Variety of different tools that you can use there. And coincidentally, when you're working with decals, I didn't really touch on decals too much here, but under appearances, if I scroll down here, the decals that are actually applied on the model, those came in directly from SOLIDWORKS, but you can create your own right in here just by grabbing an image, and you can turn on and off decals here, and you can use the manipulators right here to scale and move things around if you wanted to reposition a decal like so. My SOLIDWORKS is an awesome place to go to get access to training information, knowledge base, help content there are tons and tons of awesome videos in there that'll teach you things like applying textures, everything from all the simple stuff that I showed you today all the way up through the advanced things of creating animations and all that stuff. It's all available in the videos training portion of my SolidWorks. There's a whole training course on that you can go through. So I've got another question related to generating video content. So the answer to that is yes. In this particular demonstration, we're focusing on some of the more basic tools, but you can absolutely create all kinds of advanced animations where you're moving the camera angles around and creating videos that way, or maybe you're exploding components, visually moving components around, assembling things, or a combination of the two. There's a variety of techniques that you can use to create video output. And that video output can be either rendered as a regular video, or it can be rendered in stereo and consumed through visual reality headsets. There's a really good question. Are there particular settings that really tend to bog a system down? Yes, absolutely. So great question. We'll talk a little bit about performance now since it was brought up. So the size of the window that you see here within the graphics area definitely has an impact on performance. The larger the window, of course, the longer it's going to take as you're working with the model and getting it to refresh. Every time you rotate a little bit, notice it's got to start over again and go through all the passes. So there's tons of options that you can use to optimize your performance. If you go into options and 3D viewport, you can set, if your graphics card has OpenGL and CUDA cores and supports it, and you have the proper drivers installed, then you can use hybrid rendering, which is going to allow you to do CPU and GPU at the same time. So you're going to get at least double the performance. It definitely makes a huge impact. So definitely use hybrid if it's available with your particular graphics card, or cards. If you have multiple, you can leverage multiple as well. There's a bunch of real-time rendering settings and things like that, but the maximum resolution within the graphics area is what we're setting right here. So if you make the application not full screen and minimize the size of the whole window, this will actually scale along with it. But what you're setting here is what the maximum size is going to be. So if I crank that way up, then of course it's going to slow down my performance. It's going to take a little bit longer to pass. You can set some defaults for things like fast rendering mode. You can tell it to go ahead and use the denoiser, which again is new for Service Pack 3 of 2018 and is going to definitely boost performance. You can set things like the acceleration mode. Downscaled is going to give you a little better performance. Let's see what else. So those are a couple of things that affect performance. Anytime you have things that are really reflective and it's having to calculate the ray tracing of reflective stuff, or even more intense, performance hits would be things that are transparent. So if you have like glass materials and you have lighting going through there, those are going to take longer to process and calculate. And then of course, the obvious one is setting these settings right here. If you go to preview mode, this is going to be super fast, and you can just rotate around. You can get the materials set, you can get the angles set for your cameras. You get just a kind of a quick preview of things, but really it's more of a setup mode. And then once you think you have things set, then you can maybe bump up to fast. And then when you want to really get a good look at what it's going to look like for the output, you can go to the accurate mode. So those are some of the things that are going to affect performance. So while we're waiting on another question here, another handy little trick that I'll share with you guys is, well, a couple of tricks. If you want to just take a snapshot of what you're looking at in the graphics area, so you've got this thing set up and you just want to take a quick snapshot, Control P will do a snapshot, and where that's going to output the image is back over to your images, and it'll just take a smaller resolution snapshot of exactly what you were just looking at. So that's kind of a handy little trick. That's Control P. And then another great trick that I use all the time is if you want to duplicate a visual appearance somewhere, you can do shift and left click on something, then shift and right click on something else, and it will duplicate that appearance. Great little trick that you guys can use. I thank you guys for joining us for our webinar, and hope you have a great day.